Before Korea, before gangs, before his fists became his only resume, Ken Kitano was just another Japanese kid with a ruined home. His parents were gone. No safety net, no advice, no one to tell him to slow down. By 16, fighting wasn't a choice, it was survival. Trauma shaped him, and delinquent energy did the rest. With no family to lean on, Ken became a street brawler. Not smart, not talented, just stubborn and violent. His classmates feared him. Teachers gave up. Society wrote him off as trash. Then he met Yumin. She was everything he wasn't. Smart, driven, beautiful. She wanted to be a cop and start a new life in Korea. Ken wanted to follow her anywhere, even if it meant disappearing behind her shadow.
Ken's feelings for Yumin were never subtle. He watched her like she was his last chance at being normal. When she left Japan to train as a police officer in Korea, Ken made one of the dumbest romantic decisions in manga history. He followed her. No plan, no money, no qualifications, just pure simp energy carrying him across borders.
Reality hits fast. Korea gives Ken a tiny, cracked room and a mattress that feels thinner than his self-worth. He's broke. He's hungry. He's one bad haircut away from blending into the background forever. Still, he dreams. He imagines himself in a police uniform, standing beside Yumin like he belongs. The truth is uglier. He's a dropout with zero chance.
Desperate, Ken drags himself to the police station, hoping for a miracle. What he gets is rejection. Cold, immediate, final. His dream of becoming a cop dies right there. Poverty, failure, fists. That's all he has left. Then fate twists the knife. He sees Yumin. Not just Yumin, but Yumin in uniform. Sharp, confident, powerful. The kind of presence that makes criminals nervous and fools like Ken lose their composure. He approaches, awkward and unsure. They exchange a few words, a few polite smiles. Ken's heart is racing, but Yumin feels untouchable. Then a rising star prosecutor joins her, speaking with confidence and ambition. Ken watches from the side, finally understanding something painful. She belongs to a world he cannot reach. Panicking, Ken blurts out, "I've got work." A weak lie, a flimsy shield. Yumin sees through it instantly. Her gaze cuts deeper than any punch. She knows he's lost. She knows he's pretending.
His dream is already ashes. He sits alone, shoveling cheap food into his mouth, shoulders slumped, clothes worn thin. A street vendor notices him, hungry, broke, barely holding it together. The vendor offers him free food with a tired smile. For a moment, Ken feels human again. For once, someone doesn't see him as garbage. Kindness never lasts long around Ken. The same vendor is suddenly cornered by a group of low-life thugs. They demand money, threaten violence, treat the man like dirt. Ken still tastes the free meal on his tongue. Rage bubbles up. He's humiliated. He's starving. He's failed at everything. But he won't let the one person who helped him get crushed. Enough, Ken steps forward. I don't care who you are. I'll fight. Ken doesn't fight with skill. He fights with desperation, hunger, shame, weeks of frustration packed into every punch. The thugs thought they were predators. They were wrong. Ken drops one with a punch, follows with a kick, then drives a flying knee straight through another. A third charges. One clean punch sends him crashing into a food stall. The vendor watches in disbelief. This broken foreigner is tearing through them like they never stood a chance. Ken tells the thugs he can't stand people who prey on the weak. From now on, the old man is under his protection. The street falls quiet. The thugs are down. The vendor is safe. The crowd is shaken. Above the street, silhouettes stand on a nearby rooftop. Cigarettes glow in the dark. Smoke curls into the night air. Their eyes lock onto Ken below, like hunters spotting something dangerous. Ken's journey doesn't begin with ambition. It begins with exhaustion. Ken wakes up on a hotel bed, staring at the ceiling. His body is sore, knuckles bruised, muscles screaming. The fight from last night comes back in fragments, not heroic, just messy and painful. Ken is confronted by a rough-looking man holding a pickaxe. Ken assumes it's a service room or staff checking in.
Instead of attacking or threatening Ken, the man speaks angrily and invites him to join their gang. The offer is blunt and unexpected. Before Ken can react, another man appears from behind, quickly apologizing for the pickaxe man's rough attitude. He bows slightly, trying to smooth things over, acting polite and deferential toward Ken.
Pak Tae-soo steps forward and introduces himself to Ken. He then introduces Yang Sandae as well, mentioning his nickname, Pickaxe. As the introductions finish, another man appears and casually asks Ken if he is hungry. Ken looks at the men in front of him without answering right away. Ken is brought along and given food. He immediately starts eating aggressively, shoveling the meal into his mouth without hesitation. While eating, Ken asks the men who they are. Park Tae-soo responds by assuming that Ken already knows who they are, answering him with that expectation rather than giving a direct explanation. Ken looks at the men and assumes they are a gang, some kind of Yakuza equivalent. Park Tae-soo corrects him and explains that in Korea, they're called gundals. Ken immediately assumes the meal isn't free and that there's a catch. Park Tae-soo stops him, saying they're not talking business right now. Hearing that, Ken relaxes and goes back to eating, this time gratefully.
A beautiful, sexy waitress in a short skirt approaches Ken and offers Ken a cup of coffee. Ken thanks her politely, taking it gratefully. Meanwhile, Pickaxe can't take his eyes off her, clearly distracted by her presence, and offers to go out with him. The moment shifts when Park Tae-soo leans in and suddenly offers Ken a proposition.
Park Tae-soo tells Ken to follow him, insisting that he won't regret it. Ken shrugs and refuses nonchalantly, clearly uninterested. Pickaxe reacts angrily and suddenly lifts his pickaxe as if to intimidate Ken. Park Tae-soo quickly steps in and calmly asks Ken the reason for refusing. Ken explains that a gang is a criminal organization and that he wants to join the police instead. Park Tae-soo responds, asking if Ken is talking about joining another gang called State, showing a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Park Tae-soo explains to Ken that gangs, states, and monopolistic enterprises operate essentially the same way. A state controls its territory and population and is prepared to use any force necessary to defend them. Using strength to protect territory is the first way a gang and a state are alike. He continues, saying that a state always appears more legitimate than a gang thanks to its history and scale. Its scale is so vast that those living within it rarely grasp its true nature, and over time, questions about its rightfulness fade. Only when a new conflict arises does the state reveal its true colors. For Park Tae-soo, a state is like a perfect gang in its early stages, and he asks Ken if he agrees. Park Tae-soo tells Ken he doesn't reject the state, he's not an anarchist, he just wants a future enterprise to earn proper recognition, not exploit the system. Laws, taxes, and strength are the three things that define both a state and a gang. After explaining the similarities between gangs and states, Park Tae-soo turns to Ken and offers him a chance to join their gang. Ken thinks the group is a bunch of idiots and considers thrashing them before leaving. Park Tae-soo sees right through him and suggests they settle the matter with their fists. Ken agrees, not out of loyalty, but simply to get his peace. Park Tae-soo stands up and removes his suit, sizing up Ken. Noticing Ken's wild, beast-like eyes, he assumes Ken has faced Yakuza before, a quality he admires. He launches a kick to Ken's face and follows up with a barrage of punches, while Pickaxe cheers him on. Ken, impressed but focused, remembers Yumin in the middle of the attack and blocks a powerful kick. The gang members are surprised by his skill. Ken shouts, "You don't know me." He doesn't care about the gang's motives, only about protecting someone. As he throws a punch, Park Tae-soo steps aside in surrender, and Ken's punch smashes into the wall, breaking his hand. Park Tae-soo keeps his word to leave Ken alone, but instead of stepping away, he formally steps down and hands over his position as the boss of the gang. The gang members bow to Ken in respect. Ken stands dumbstruck, completely bewildered, because he thought he was just the punching bag in the fight and never actually hit Park Tae-soo. Ken thinks about Yumin again, his first love, the whole reason he crossed borders and ruined his own life just to stand in the same country as her. On his way out, things spiral the way they always do. He runs into gang members, fists fly, bodies drop. Ken wins, easily. After the dust settles, the gang offers him the top seat, head of the organization, boss. Ken doesn't even hesitate. He turns it down flat. Ken makes it clear he's not a gangster.
He doesn't care if a state works just like a gang. To him, only dumbasses or cult followers would buy into that kind of thinking. Now, he's convinced there's a whole dumbass club standing in front of him. As usual, he declines the offer again. No drama, no interest.
Ken spots Yumin walking down the street. She's in her police uniform, and it hits him all over again. She's painfully beautiful. So beautiful, it almost hurts. His chest tightens. He remembers the rich prosecutor standing beside her, the confidence, the status. Then his own lie flashes back, saying he worked at a video game company. Ken knows better now. Yumin saw straight through that the moment it left his mouth.
Park Tae-soo is still going on. States, justice, systems, ideals, the same lecture, same fire. Ken just stands there, zoning out. That's when Park Tae-soo suddenly leans in and shouts straight into Ken's ear. He rants about their plan, building an organization, climbing to the top of the food chain, owning the social hierarchy, becoming a massive company, using the organization itself to hide whatever they need to do in the shadows. Ken suddenly throws out an idea. He asks Park Tae-soo if an online video game company would work. Park Tae-soo is stunned. He never imagined a guy like Ken could casually name an industry, let alone one that clean. Ken follows it up with a condition. He wants a yearly wage, 20 million won. Park Tae-soo agrees immediately. He even says Ken can take all the profits if he wants. Ken accepts. Just like that, he agrees to become the boss. Park Tae-soo decides Ken needs fixing. The clothes, the hair, everything about him screams broken foreigner, not boss. First stop, a salon. The barber looks at Ken and confidently suggests an afro. Ken answers with a punch straight to the barber's face. No discussion. He settles on an improved Regent hairstyle instead. Next, they head to an expensive designer shop. The owner clearly knows Park Tae-soo and greets him warmly. Ken steps out in a suit, completely transformed. The poor bastard from before is gone. Standing there now is a proper, classy gang boss.
The gang members can't hide their reaction. Ken looks sharp, commanding, untouchable. For the first time, they feel like a real family, loyal, bound by duty and honor. Only death could ever tear them apart. They all nod in agreement. They look cool, at least for a moment. Then, almost immediately, the mood flips. They start singing, dancing, and celebrating like kids at a party. Honestly, they look like fools. Later, Ken returns to his dirty little apartment. He strips off the fancy clothes, slipping back into his old ragged attire before heading into the building. Back to his old life. Back to the familiar life.
Ken shows up late to the gang meeting and gets greeted by the members as he walks in. The cafeteria is active, and the same hot waitress from before is there too, Miss Yu. It's clear now she's not just staff, she's like a part of the gang. Pickaxe immediately runs his mouth. He assumes Miss Yu is his girl and flashes money, offering it just to be with her. Miss Yu shuts him down without hesitation. She tells Pickaxe not to say stupid things in front of the boss. She makes it clear she's not that kind of woman. Cigarettes in hand, Park Tae-soo steps in calmly, smoothing things over. He politely excuses them, saying he and Ken need to have a man-to-man talk.
Ken gets ready to formally introduce himself. He assumes there's an office somewhere, a proper setup, a real meeting with real members. Park Tae-soo stops him, calmly tells him there's no need. Ken already met everyone. That's why they're all camped out in the bar. It takes a second to sink in, then it hits Ken all at once. He starts asking questions. How do they move around? Public transportation. Do they have territory? None. An office? At least a rented space? Nothing. Then the final blow. The expensive suit Ken is wearing, that was bought using all the money they had, every last won. Ken just stares. They're not an organization. They're not even a gang. They're broke. Park Tae-soo tells Ken not to worry about their current situation. Money, territory, status, none of that matters right now. What matters is that they're finally ready for that fateful day. As he says it, the gang members start laughing and daydreaming like kids, getting carried away by their own imagination. Everyone, except Ken and Miss Yu. Park Tae-soo moves on to business. If they're going to start moving, they need manpower. One man in particular, Chang Do-hyun. He's from another city, a street fighter from the center of the country. Nobody has ever beaten him. Rumor says he once single-handedly crushed an entire gang that tried to hire him by force. Everyone in the room knows his name. Everyone's been watching him.
Park Tae-soo tells Ken this one is his responsibility. Ken has to convince Chang Do-hoon to join them. Ken agrees, not because he believes in the dream, but because he needs to earn his wage. Park Tae-soo assigns Marin, a gang member, to locate Chang Do-hoon. The rest of the gang is told to stay put at the bar, no moving around, no spending money, because there is none left. Lunch and dinner end up being instant noodles. That's the reality of Ken's new organization.
Morning comes. The group heads out to the city where Chang Do-hoon is said to be. No cars, no luxury. They walk. Ken chased a coin on the highway and was almost hit by an upcoming vehicle. He twisted his ankle, and Pickaxe advised Ken to not do that again since it is embarrassing while wearing a suit. That's how poor Ken was previously. They arrive at a historical site, quiet and heavy with age. Marin confirms this is the meeting place. He's the one who set it up. A small car pulls in. The door opens. Chang Do-hoon steps out. He's massive, thick muscles, overwhelming presence, the kind of body that tells you this man lives through violence. The gang members freeze, shocked by how big and solid he looks.
Chang Do-hoon looks at them and asks what they want. Park Tae-soo answers calmly, saying Chang Do-hoon should already have an idea. Chang Do-hoon studies him for a moment, then recognizes him. He says he's 21 now, ready to join a gang, and out of all of them, he likes Park Tae-soo's group the most. But he makes one thing clear. He plans to take the gang under his wing as their boss. He would rather die than bow to someone weaker than himself. Park Tae-soo responds without anger. He tells Chang Do-hoon that if he acts like that, their boss will dispose of him. Still, Tae-soo understands his logic. A man should only obey someone stronger than himself. That's when he explains it. He's not the boss. Ken is.
Chang Do-hoon laughs it off. He can't believe someone like Park Tae-soo, with his reputation, isn't the leader. Ken, on the other hand, is already thinking ahead. He just needs to convince this guy. Fighting shouldn't be necessary. Park Tae-soo cuts in and tells Chang Do-hoon he'll understand everything once he fights Ken. Chang Do-hoon accepts immediately. The fight is set.
Park Tae-soo quietly tells Ken not to make Chang Do-hoon wait. Ken looks at the giant in size. He asks why he even has to fight a gorilla like that, especially when his ankle is already messed up from wearing shoes he's not used to. Tae-soo explains it plainly. If they want to recruit Chang Do-hoon, then as the boss, Ken has to fight him. That's how this works. Ken shuts it down immediately. He won't fight just for recruitment. Tae-soo understands right away. Ken will never fight without a reason.
Before anyone can react, Tae-soo steps forward, and without warning, Chang Do-hoon spears him. It's brutal. Tae-soo goes flying like he just got hit by a car. Ken snaps. He kicks Do-hoon straight in the chest. Pain explodes through his bad ankle. The kick does nothing. Do-hoon barely moves. He mocks Ken, asking if that's his reason to fight. Ken clenches his teeth. Now he has one. Tae-soo took care of him. That's enough. Ken warns Do-hoon. Once he starts fighting, he doesn't stop halfway. Do-hoon answers with another spear. Ken crashes into a heritage wall. Stone cracks. Ken collapses, stunned by how insanely strong Do-hoon is. Tears leak out without him realizing. In the background, Tae-soo yells at him not to cry. The fight continues. Punches, kicks, bodies slamming again and again. Ken realizes hitting Do-hoon's body is useless. He's too big, too solid, and Ken can't even reach his face properly. While thinking, Ken gets speared again. He falls off the wall and slams hard into the ground. Pain floods his body. On the ground, Ken notices a coin he picked up earlier. Pickaxe shouts at him not to use it, says it's shameful. Do-hoon walks toward Ken, relaxed. He promises the next blow will be the last, and that it'll hurt enough to put Ken in a hospital for months. Still, he admits something. Ken is tough. Do-hoon grins. He's enjoying himself now. He even starts dancing. Ken grips the coin in his hand and suddenly runs away from Do-hoon. Do-hoon sneers, seeing it as pure cowardice. Pickaxe panics and yells at Ken to fight properly or he'll be kicked out of the gang. Marin and Park Tae-soo just stand there, stunned, unable to process what Ken is doing. Ken shouts back that he has no intention of running. He just wants to leave a scratch on Do-hoon's car, using the coin in his hand. The words don't register at first. Then they do.
Do-hyun freezes in shock as Ken grins like a devil and starts scratching the car. Not just one line, he drags the coin across it again and again. Do-hyun lets out a scream and rushes toward his beloved, cute little car.
That's the opening Ken needed. Ken closes the distance and smashes a punch straight into Do-hyun's face. Forcing himself to ignore the pain in his ankle, Ken leaps higher than anyone expects and drops a brutal kick onto Do-hyun's head. Ken tells him plainly he's better than him because Do-hyun attacked his friend without warning. Do-hyun crashes to the ground, bleeding. Park Tae-soo steps in and says that since Ken won, Do-hyun must now join the gang. Ken refuses. He says he won't accept someone who attacks from behind. He doesn't care how strong Do-hyun might be. They need someone righteous, someone willing to protect his friends.
Park Tae-soo turns to Do-hyun and apologizes. He tells him he can't join. That's when Do-hyun finally understands. This is the gang he was looking for. He calls out to Ken, apologizes, admits he was wrong. He asks Ken to take him in and calls him boss. Chang Do-hyun officially joins the gang. The chapter ends with the gang piling into Do-hyun's tiny, cute car, riding around like idiots. For the first time, they own a vehicle, their first car.
Inside a cafe, Chang Do-hyun looks around and finally asks the obvious question. Why don't they have a car, or even an office? Pickaxe proudly answers that they do have a car now. Do-hyun immediately tells him to shut up. Ken casually explains that they'll get Do-hyun an Armani suit. Do-hyun can't believe what he's hearing. Park Tae-soo cuts in and tells the truth. They can't even afford socks. They barely have enough money to sit there drinking coffee. Hearing that, Do-hyun snaps. He flips the table and demands they at least buy him something. The scene jumps to a local market. Do-hyun ends up buying a heavily discounted suit. He's clearly annoyed, but settles for it anyway.
Later, Ken walks alone, humming to himself. He spots Yu-min outside the police station. At first, Yu-min doesn't recognize him because of his formal attire. Ken explains who he is, and Yu-min finally recognizes him. Ken asks her out for a drink so they can talk about the past. Yu-min checks the time and agrees, but only for a short while. Ken thinks he's lucky. Then Yu-min asks where they're going. Ken says he knows a place. Ken brings Yu-min to a coffee shop where Miss Yu is working and orders 2 cups of coffee. They talk for a bit. Yu-min advises Ken to get a serious job and to stay strong. Ken tells her he's already part of a video game company, which is why he's wearing a suit. Yu-min immediately sees through the lie again and gently calls him out. Ken insists they're developing a game, but he messes up the acronyms. Yu-min casually corrects him. A group sitting nearby overhears Ken bragging and notices the mistake. They start talking loudly about how their group will soon become the #1 game developer in the world. Ken is completely devastated by what he hears. Before leaving, Yu-min says she'd like to visit Ken's workplace sometime. Ken nervously asks if tomorrow would be okay, since he isn't actually part of a video game company and there's no office to show her today. Yu-min agrees to visit tomorrow, then excuses herself because she has to go. Ken walks Yu-min out of the coffee shop. They say their goodbyes.
Ken goes back inside the cafe and quietly sits at the table next to the group of developers. He doesn't interrupt, he just listens, eyes lowered, taking everything in. After a while, the group gets up and says they need to head back to work. Ken follows them out without a word. Just before they enter the building, Ken suddenly grabs one of the guys and drags him aside. He calmly tells him he needs him to answer a few questions. The guy doesn't get a choice. Elsewhere, Chang Do-hyun's phone rings. It's Ken. He asks for help. Do-hyun answers without hesitation. Anything for the boss.
Back at the building, Ken storms the office door open and goes inside the office. The noise grabs everyone's attention. One of the developers immediately recognizes him. He's the weird guy from the cafe earlier. Ken doesn't waste time. He tells them straight to their faces that they're imposters, that they're not real developers. He accuses them of operating in the black market of the video game world, trading items and in-game currency, then selling them at inflated prices for real money. Ken tells them to leave. He says he needs the office. They refuse, claiming they're a legitimate company.
Ken presses harder. He says he knows they're selling player information, that it's piracy, that they're criminals. The group fires back. He has no proof. Ken calmly kicks a large box across the room. The box bursts open, and the guy Ken grabbed earlier tumbles out. Ken looks at them and says he has a witness. The room goes dead silent.
3 of the developers step forward and decide to fight. They claim they practice martial arts and aren't scared of Ken. Ken answers by kicking a table straight at them. At the same time, Chang Do-hoon swings a long wooden strip, about 2 by 2 inches, and smashes the table mid-air. The broken table slams into the men, knocking them down hard. Ken calmly tells them that if they really want to fight, that's fine, but if not, they should leave the office. One by one, the developers retreat, sniffing and humiliated as they walk out.
With the office finally quiet, Ken asks them why they don't just make a real game instead of whining and scamming people. Do-hoon adds that they should conquer the world with dignity. Ken laughs and throws out an idea. Why not make a gang-based MMORPG, something like Mafioso or Yakuza? Do-hoon immediately agrees. The developers stare ahead, eyes sparkling, like they've just seen a revelation. The next day, Yumin visits Ken's office. She thanks him for letting her stop by. Ken awkwardly asks if the place is too messy since it's an old building. Yumin smiles and says it's fine, nice even.
Before leaving, Yumin tells Ken she's looking forward to seeing him again in the future. Ken blushes. The moment hits him hard, and he can't stop smiling. Suddenly, Do-hoon pops up behind him and comments on how heartwarming it is. Ken jumps, shocked, and panics internally, wondering if Do-hoon saw him with Yumin. He plays dumb and asks what Do-hoon is talking about. Do-hoon answers that he's talking about their new office and praises Ken for being a great boss. For the first time, the gang finally has something real. They now have their own office. Late at night, Ken calls Yumin to set up a date for the next day at the same coffee shop. Yumin is already in her nightwear when she answers, half asleep but smiling. She agrees. The next morning, rain pours down. Ken arrives 2 hours early, nervous and soaked. Before he can enter the cafe, 2 men block his way. They tell him the shop is closed. When Ken asks why, they say the girl working there refused to take care of customers. Ken doesn't understand what they mean at first. The men explain it plainly. She's supposed to use her charm to please customers. Since she refused, the cafe won't open today. They tell Ken to come back tomorrow. Inside the cafe, Miss Yu is being abused by the men. At that moment, the door suddenly swings open. Ken steps in. The men freeze. Miss Yu looks up and calls his name. One of the thugs recognizes Ken immediately. He's one of the guys Ken beat before. Ken moves without hesitation. He leaps forward, crushing one man's chin with a kick. He punches another, headbutts the third, then grabs Miss Yu and pulls her away from them. He looks at the men sprawled on the floor and tells them not to oppress the weak. Miss Yu stares at him, stunned. Ken gently sets her down and apologizes for grabbing her so suddenly. She brushes it off. Outside, more men arrive. Backup. They shout that they're going to kill him. Ken realizes the situation is bad. There are too many of them. Ms. Yu quickly tells him there's a back door. They run. Even there, more men are waiting. Ken charges forward and slams a flying knee into one of them, sending him crashing away. They keep running as the others chase them through the rain. They finally reach a restaurant and force the door open. Inside, it's quiet. Ken thinks they've lost them. An old man stands there, staring at him. The old man recognizes Ken. Ken recognizes him too. It's the man he saved the other day. The old man shows them one of the rooms and welcomes them inside, telling them they'll be safe there for now. Miss Yu thanks him and asks if she can take a shower. She's soaked and freezing. The old man agrees and mentions that he needs to head back to work. That confuses Ken. He asks why the old man still needs to work at a restaurant when he has his own business. The old man explains that he had to shut his place down to avoid making things worse. That's why he ran. Ken apologizes, saying it's his fault. He promised he would protect him. The old man shakes his head and tells Ken it isn't his fault. Later, Miss Yu is in the shower. Ken sits quietly outside the bathroom, staring at the floor. From inside, Miss Yu starts talking. She explains that the men chasing them belong to a gang that controls most of the massage parlors and cabarets in the city. That same gang runs her coffee shop and many nearby businesses. They're known for being brutal and relentless. Ken doesn't respond. Miss Yu suddenly steps out and asks if he's even listening. Ken calmly tells her he heard everything. She says she's telling him all this because she's grateful, but she wants him to understand that helping people like her puts a target on his back. The gang won't stop hunting him. She admits this is the first time anyone has ever saved her. Ken disagrees. He says he didn't save her. He only dragged her into more danger. Miss Yu insists. She looks straight at him and says he saved her life. Miss Yu steps out, completely exposed, and tells Ken to take her. Ken panics and shouts at her to cover herself. She insists. She says this is the only way she can repay him, the only way she knows how. Ken tells her there's no need, but she doesn't stop. She kneels in front of him, desperate to show her gratitude. That's when Ken's mind snaps back to human. He pulls away and pushes Miss Yu aside. Ken apologizes immediately for reacting so suddenly. He tells her he can't do this. His heart already belongs to someone else. Miss Yu asks if that someone is the policewoman. Ken denies it, flustered. She doesn't believe him. Her voice cracks as she assumes he's disgusted by her. She starts crying, saying she's been treated like a toy her whole life. Men used her. Her job is dirty. Her past is dirty. She says Ken must be just like the rest. Ken shouts for her to stop. He tells her that's all nonsense. No one is soiled. None of that matters. It's all bullshit. He covers her with a blanket, then stands up and grabs his suit. Ken tells her he needs to go outside and contact the others. He tells her to stay there and rest. Outside, the rain is pouring, and Ken is furious.
1 month before Mount Jiri, 4 hours before the underground warehouse incident.
Ken calls Yumin to cancel their date for tonight. Yumin asks why. Ken tells her he has an urgent job and apologizes. Yumin understands right away. Ken thanks her. Before hanging up, Yumin wishes him luck. The phone rings again. Marin answers while the gang members sit around killing time. It's Ken. Pickaxe looks confused. It's supposed to be Ken's day off. Marin explains the situation to everyone. The moment Pickaxe hears what's going on, he takes off running, his mind immediately jumping to Miss Yu.
The rain is still pouring. Ken moves through the district, heading back to where he left Miss Yu. Through the heavy downpour, he notices a man walking toward him. Ken immediately hides, assuming the man might be connected to the gang from earlier. But as the figure gets closer, Ken realizes something's off. The man doesn't look like a gang member. He's a foreigner. Ken can't quite tell where he's from. Vietnamese? Thai? They pass each other in silence, the rain swallowing the moment. Ken briefly recalls how he himself must look right now.
When Ken reaches the house where he left Miss Yu, his heart drops. The place is wrecked, furniture overturned, clear signs of a struggle. Without hesitation, Ken runs back to the coffee shop where the earlier incident happened. Inside, he finds an older woman slumped in a chair. Ken asks her what happened. The woman admits it calmly. She sold Ji-hye, Miss Yu's real name. She explains that Ji-hye had called her earlier, worried about her safety. The woman lied and told her everything was fine, that the men were already gone. Relieved, Ji-hye thanked her and said she would stay where she was. She even told the woman she treated her like a mother. The woman thanked her in return. In the background, a man steps out. He thanks the woman for her cooperation. She cries out in pain. The man calls her scum, then leaves her alive anyway. She thanks him for not killing her. Ken explodes in anger. He tells her she betrayed Ji-hye just to save her own life. The woman doesn't deny it. She tells Ken she didn't want to die. Then Ken notices blood running down her legs. Then she shouts at him. Yes, she betrayed someone who treated her like family. Yes, what she did was unforgivable, but she turns it back on him. She accuses Ken of playing the hero without taking responsibility, of acting on justice and strength without thinking of the consequences. In the end, she says Ji-hye's life is in danger because of him. Her own life is ruined. Everything escalated because Ken stepped in. If he had stayed out of it, none of this would have happened. She admits what she did was monstrous, but surviving, she says, matters more than dying for someone else. She asks him which is worse, a coward who betrays to live,
or a reckless hero who destroys lives trying to do what he thinks is right. The woman tells Ken to forget about them and to hurry and save himself while he still can.
Galki's men are everywhere now. They've flooded the district. At this point, the only way to survive is simple. Run, as far as possible. Still under the rain, Ken steps out of the coffee shop. Pickaxe is there. He immediately asks Ken where Miss Yu is, how she's doing. Ken doesn't answer. Pickaxe's face tightens. He asks Ken what he did. No reply. Pickaxe throws a punch straight into Ken's face. Without another word, Pickaxe turns and runs off, cursing as he disappears into the rain. Ken makes his way to the restaurant where the old man works. The old man tells Ken to change his clothes and asks what happened. He apologizes for his lack of strength, for his lack of conviction, for having no sense of responsibility. He admits he acted recklessly without realizing it. Because of him, the old man lost his business. Miss Yu suffered. Pickaxe was hurt. The cafe owner's life was destroyed. Ken says he isn't capable of having dreams or standing up to even the smallest injustice. Ken drops to his knees. Through tears, he calls himself trash, a worthless piece of shit. He bows his head and says it again, that he's nothing. The old man kneels in front of him. He tells Ken it seems like he didn't hear him before. This isn't Ken's fault. There is nothing wrong with helping the weak. Nothing wrong with stepping in when someone is in trouble. Ken did what was right. If anything is wrong with this world, the old man says, it's that more people don't act like Ken. He tells Ken to stay strong, not to blame himself. Whenever the old man sees someone suffer after making the right choice, it breaks his heart. Ken listens, silently. Somewhere, a man pulls open the warehouse's roll-up door and snaps at the latecomer to hurry up and get inside. Outside, two men lounge around, relaxed. One of them mentions he needs to head out somewhere soon. The late man heads down into the warehouse. The others casually tell him they'll go shopping later. He nods and agrees without question. His name is Ban Fuang, a lackey. As Ban Fuang moves further inside, he hears something, a muffled sound, a woman's voice. He pauses. The men around him tell him not to worry about it. It's none of his business.
Inside a separate room, Miss Yu stands restrained, her hands bound and her body left exposed and vulnerable. Two men stand in front of her, talking casually about what they plan to do once everything is settled. To them, she's just bait. They're waiting for the fish to bite. Outside, the rain is still coming down hard. Ken steps out of the restaurant. The old man rushes after him, grabbing his attention. He tells Ken the gang is everywhere and urges him to come back inside quickly. Ken doesn't answer. He stares down at the wet street. Then he speaks.
Ken repeats what the old man said earlier, about how it breaks his heart to see someone from the district suffer after doing the right thing. Ken tells him this district is his district, and he will protect it and the people who live in it. The old man looks at him and quietly says, "After the rain, the sun always shines." As if on cue, the rain stops. The clouds part. Sunlight breaks through. Ken moves. He begins searching for Gal Ki. On the street, he spots one of Gal Ki's men, the same man who left the warehouse earlier. Ken quickly moved and smacked him across the face without hesitation.
All right, we'll stop it here for now. Ken's past the point of turning back. No more running, no more pretending he can keep his hands clean. From here on out, every step he takes is a decision, and every decision is going to be paid for in blood. What comes next isn't about gangs, ranks, or power plays anymore. It's about responsibility and whether Ken can survive carrying that weight. If you want to see what happens next, stay with us. Like, subscribe, and stick around for the next chapter, because from here on out, it only gets darker.